On to some more bad news.
Some more bad news.
We always have fun on this, which is that in soon enough time, Britain will no longer be Britain. It will be an amorphous landmass filled with citizens of the earth. Globalised Britain, as Boris Johnson wanted it. Thank you very much for that. But first, I've seen some of you in the comments. I've seen your writing, and frankly, you need an English lesson. So buy the Trivium, which will allow you to learn about grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Sadly, not graphic design, which is our passion, as you can see here from this man pulling a chess piece out of his own head. Very impressive. You won't get the skills to do that, but you will be able to write in basic sentences, finally, after buying this. So buy it now.
I've seen you all practicing it back doors, to get it out.
I don't practice anything around anyone's back door, thank you very much. So you can buy that for £375 as a bundle for all three, or you can buy them individually as Foundations of Writing, Logic, or Rhetoric for £150 each, if you are financially incontinent. Anyway, so please buy those. And now on to the news. So this is what has been reported recently. It came out in a Telegraph article, which is what everybody has been focusing on here, which is new research produced by Professor Matt Goodwin, who has appeared on the website in the past, interviewed, I think, by Connor a few years ago now, who has suggested that, judging by projections that he has calculated, if we continue to have mass immigration on the scale that we are having right now, with birth rates being what they are, by about, what would this be, 2070, between 2060 and 2070, Britain will suddenly become a majority non-white country. So it will have a majority foreign population, people who are not ancestrally of the British Isles. And this has gotten quite a few different reactions. Personally, not a fan of it. Personally, being English, being somebody with English children who wants this country to remain functional and not another experiment in open borders, as one Oswald Mosley fan, Keir Starmer, said. And I don't want it to appear like South Africa or Zimbabwe do today. So I would rather England remain England, Wales remain Wales, Scotland remain Scotland, etc., etc. I might get arrested for saying that. We'll find out, I suppose. But
you just cause someone harm and arrest.
Probably.
And distress.
Just a
Probably,
quick
if somebody attacks me for saying that, then I am in the wrong.
Just a quick thing as well. We were never asked whether we want to give up our ancestral claim to our own land, either. The collective claim that the English have to England. This was never on the table.
No, this was just swept up and forced on us. So at the moment you can see that the current figures are that the population is still 73% white British. But again, that's 40 years from now. That's a ridiculously swift amount of time for a change of this proportion to take place. Some people are suggesting that it's already worse than what we're seeing on these graphs because of the fact that there are people who aren't in the system. This is taken from ONS figures, so there are people who will have overstayed their visas and lots of illegals who are not counted in the system, and this could be reflected in your on-the-ground experience. When you go to local towns and cities, you'll probably see a greater proportion than you would expect.
Well, this isn't evenly distributed. So in England, by the official statistics, it's 25% not English in England. But that's the official statistics. There's going to be somewhere between 1 and probably 5 million illegals.
And of course, there's going to be age disparities as well, which is a lot of the white population, the white British population are going to be older, perhaps going out less. So when you go out into the street, you might encounter a greater proportion of foreigners. But anyway, so he says in this article, projects a big rise in the proportion of UK population comprising foreign-born and second-generation immigrants from below 20% to 33.5% within the next 25 years, and by 2100. It projects 6 in 10 people in the UK will either have not been born in the UK or will have at least one immigrant parent. And the Muslim population, which currently stands as 7%, is estimated to increase to more than 1 in 10 within the next 25 years and account for 1 in 5 of all people in the UK by the end of the century, which also, of course, means that within 25 years, if it's going to be 33.5% total, that still leaves about 22-23% made up of people, probably mainly coming from North and Sub-Saharan Africa and the subcontinent, and everywhere else as well.
It's interesting because the research I was looking at showed that by 2050 we got about 25% is Islam. And so
this is by Goodwin's own projections.
Yeah, so he's running lower than that.
So he's running
saying by the end of the century.
He's running a bit lower. I don't know. There is an explanation.
Maybe he's scaling like Indian immigration or Chinese.
I don't know. I haven't had a chance to look at it, his research, or get it off his. I think he's put it on his blog. So
there is a bit of an explanation in here, but I am not a demographer, so I'm not really qualified to say how it is.
The point being, it's bad news either way.
Yeah, either way, it's showing a general trend that anybody on the ground can see and has been able to see for a few decades at this point at least, because again, as far as I'm concerned, the second that Britain is no longer majority British, that defined as the people who can trace their ancestry back to the English, Welsh, Scottish, etc. It's no longer Britain, it's no longer England, no longer Scotland.
And we've seen the experiment been played out in Luton or London.
Yes. They are voids. They are nowhere places. They are
sometimes they're colonies of areas.
Yes, or they're just colonies of foreign populations. What I would suggest it would be the most likely result of something like this is, as you see in those examples, you would get more and more factionalism where the people just break off into their own ethnic conclaves. So by the end of the century, that 33.7% white British population would probably be mostly confined to their own areas, where they keep to themselves, and the same with everybody else. There would still be some holdouts, I'm sure, of Lib Dems going on about how not racist they are, but they would still be living in those majority Lib Dem enclaves.
I expect in 40 years the Lib Dems will either died off or become rabid racists.
Judging by Ed Davies' most recent post,
I know the rabid racist
about the train speaker users.
They're leaning into the racism.
Perhaps. But it goes on to say in his reports, he says the findings were certain to spark a considerable degree of anxiety, concern and political opposition among many voters who favoured lowering immigration and slowing the pace of change in order to maintain the symbols, traditions, cultures and way of life of the traditional majority group. He also said that their concerns need to be recognised, respected and addressed if the UK is to avoid considerable political turbulence and polarisation in the years and decades ahead. Now, that's a very polite way of saying what needs to happen, which is that this needs to be stopped and reversed immediately. As has been pointed out, even if we were to leave figures as they are right now and close all of the borders, the birth rates alone would mean that this would happen slower, but it would still happen within 100 years.
This is the point that David Betts has been making as he's been going around the podcast circuit, is when a majority group loses their status as the majority group, that's the most likely trigger point for a civil war, because it's just not a desirable thing to lose the collective influence and power that the majority group has over their own country. There's no advantage.
I think you've got to look at the demographics to say that it's very clear that in many areas already we're seeing that loosening of power and the losing of power. Yeah. And interestingly enough on this, because I did do some research on population about 6 months ago where I was considering this impact of Islam on places like that. His numbers he's talking about Britain. And so if you talk about England, that demographic change is happening much more quickly because in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, it's still larger majorities of white people who strip that out. And I suspect he will look at England as being a much quicker timescale.
It is broken down further as pulled up by Juice on Twitter, where it shows... already
28.9%.
Yes.
Yeah, England will be hit the hardest, the quickest by it. Yeah. But even then, you're talking in Wales and Scotland, you're still talking at most a third of the population, whereas England would be just below. Now, Northern Ireland seems to fare a lot better in this. It's still worse. I don't know if his projections are taking into account...
Irish and non-Irish?
Potentially. I don't know if it's also going to take into account any trickle that would come up from the Republic of Ireland, which are also facing their own problems as well.
That will happen to them.
And speaking of which, there is always the narratives that come with this, because people typically don't like to be displaced in their own ancestral homelands. Just look at the Irish, for an example, even when the people who are displacing them are basically indistinguishable in ways the Irish would not like to admit, genetically speaking.
But there's
at
still a
least.
different ethnic
Yes,
group.
obviously. People don't like being displaced, so you have to, because we're Western Europeans, we're very sentimental, we're very smarmy, and we've got lots of emotions and empathy for other things. You need to feed them narratives, and Ireland has been seeing this because, of course, the Republic of Ireland has also been experiencing a lot of problems with mass migration recently, and all of a sudden what happens is that you start to get news programmes as narrated by Colin Farrell,
Traitor.
of all people. Yeah, he's named here as saying, like Bono, he's lost his Irish card. Just call him a traitor.
He's a traitor.
Call him a blood traitor for all I care, because that is what he is. Colin Farrell telling everybody that we Irish were never homogenous, always hybrids, always mongrels.
Are we going back to like
we
the
allowed to
mythical invasions of Ireland that happened in prehistory or something?
Yeah, I just
Almost
imagine
as
all those Vikings that they're saying were Islamic and black.
Yeah.
Just coming over, you know.
It's almost as if Cromwell himself had written this.
Yeah.
But this is coming from, who's producing this? The state broadcaster.
Of course it is.
Because of course it has to be, because part of the process is always to break down your conception of yourself and your own history, despite the fact that Ireland, more so than anywhere else in the British Isles, has had an incredibly strong conception of itself.
Yeah.
That's what the Troubles were about. That's what...
I mean, historically, we all have.
yeah, historically, but they've held on to theirs a lot longer than everywhere else.
Absolutely.
But that's why you have to begin breaking that down to allow people to accept this more and
Exactly. What is the sole purpose of this? There's only one reason to do this, and that is to disinherit the Irish from Ireland. In the same way that the attacks on British identity and English identity are to disinherit the English from England.
Yeah.
There's just no other way of looking at it.
One of the things that always comes up as well is this idea that, European tribes invaded each other, so you have to accept infinity immigration from the rest of the world, despite the fact that within our little circle of Earth, this is where the vast majority of anybody came from for thousands of years. And there's other people commenting this. I didn't get the tweets up before we came on here, but I got them up on my own computer to refer to them. So people like Sunda Katwala, who is the
the grey squirrel.
the CEO of British Future, that NGO, saying that Goodwin should be criticised in his report for defining the white British share of the population as people who do not have an immigrant parent. Because apparently that disqualifies King Charles III, people like Ed Miliband and Boris Johnson. To be fair, I would be happy.
Yeah, okay.
I would be happy
I'd kick them out.
to say Boris Johnson is not English. Personally, that's my new thing. Also, David Aaronovitch.
Having one immigrant parent is not like a very high bar. Like most people don't have one immigrant parent.
No?
Yeah.
No,
but David Aaronovitch also said that the saying the foreign-born and their descendants covers just about everybody in the country. Of course,
But it's not their descendants into
infinitum.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what he's doing is he's extending the timeline back like 30,000 years before anybody was even here.
Yeah.
And then when
Go back a trillion seconds.
Then when he was called up on it by Eric Kaufman, who's been in the office as
he's
well,
good.
is on the website. You should check that interview out. Saying that, I mean, it's based on more recent provenance than what you're talking about. Aaronovitch was starting to ask, do the classic thing: are Britons Anglo-Saxons? Does language define? He's starting to deconstruct it, break it all down.
English people are Anglo-Saxons, and next question. Welsh people are Welsh. Next question.
I think people who've been on these isles longer than most countries have had an idea of what the word nation even is perfectly reasonable.
Yeah,
I think that's
absolutely.
perfectly reasonable. If the Maori are indigenous to New Zealand when Oxford has been around longer than...
They've only been there for 800 years.
Yeah, then I think we can say that we're indigenous. So you get the typical people like that trying to break all of this down, when really all they're trying to do is run cover for the fact that this is not something that anybody wants, and it's increasingly becoming a very popular position that nobody wants this to happen. An interesting reaction as well, and this isn't to criticise him at all, was Lewis Brackpool thinking that this was part of the Overton shift for the Telegraph to be reporting this so openly, and That's
fair.
That's a fair view, but I don't think that this is part of an Overton shift, Overton window shift, because this is the sort of thing that has been reported on numerous times in the past. It's just becoming more and more visible to most people, whereas most people would have dismissed it or tried to go on anti-racist priors.
In the sort of mid-2000s, there was reporting on this sort of thing. Do you remember?
I do.
And then everyone said, well, that's something for a long time away.
Well,
it's like getting closer and closer.
Here's some more recent stuff with regards to, for instance, America. So this was back in 2014 and 2015. Joe Biden at a White House summit praised the constant and unrelenting stream of immigration into the US. He said, folks like me who are Caucasian of European descent for the first time in 2017, unsurprisingly, he misspoke. Because what he meant was, I think, 2040. Will be in an absolute minority in the United States of America.
Good thing,
absolute minority, yes.
No, I remember the clip.
And that's not a bad thing. That's a source of our strength. Diversity is our strength. Joe Biden, the eternal Irishman. What can we say?
Put a Catholic in charge.
There was The Guardian reporting a few years ago saying Gen Z will be the last generation with white majority in the US. This was also reported on as far back as 2018 by the Brookings Institute, saying all of this. And there are people who are part of large NGOs, anti-hate group NGOs, who for a very, very long time have seemingly had a vested interest in making sure that this happens, to the point that quite notoriously the editor-in-chief of the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, a notorious anti-hate group, Mark Potok, was caught on a video that was uploaded onto YouTube, which I don't know if it's still available. You can try and follow this link if you want to double check that. For some reason has just been tracking non-Hispanic whites proportion of the US population going down. Of course, he is the sort of person, SPLC are the sort of organisation that would say, if you think that's a bad thing, then you're committing a hate crime.
Absolutely.
Trying to make sure that it's illegal. So it's interesting to me that there are certain people and certain ideologies that have a vested interest in ensuring that European majority cultures become minorities.
One of the things that they would say is that why are you worried about this? What's the concern for the white population, as Biden has just done? But then you can just flip over to Zimbabwe. And
the fact that we're already second-class citizens.
Yeah, you flip over to Zimbabwe and South Africa and say, that's the extreme, they just kill you. And they will when they get into power, and they want to steal things from you. You think you have Ed Davey and your friends will have a nice house in Surrey? They won't come for that? Yeah. Of course they will once they're in power for it, because that's...
And if they end up in power, all of a sudden nothing works, the taps don't work anymore, farming goes to pot. If you're the guy with the nice house where things still kind of work, they're coming for you, just the same as what happens to the farmers in South Africa.
Because to be fair, if we were a podcast at the time of the Britons and the Celts, as the Romans had left... and we've watched all the Anglos and the Saxons coming in, we'd be sitting here going, our population of Anglo-Saxon Romans were 100%. Now, 10 years later, we're down to 50. Why? Because they've chopped us all up.
They're going to push us into the Welsh valleys.
That's right. We're going to go to Ireland.
The thing that underpins this, though, is the unspoken question is, why should we give up a collective claim to the land?
We shouldn't have to.
Exactly. We shouldn't. And so everything they do is to attempt to erase the collective claim. But the group of people, as in the English, have the collective claim to England. The Irish have a collective claim to Ireland. And the entire point of all of this is to say, no, you don't deserve this collective claim.
And in America, this wasn't, like in England, this wasn't put up to a popular vote. This was a decision made through the passing of the 1965 Hart-Celler Act, which was explicitly argued on the basis that it would not fundamentally change the demographics of the US as they existed in 1965 by that point.
This is just like Jonathan Miller debating with Enoch Powell, going, well, I just don't think that it will become 2/5 non-white. It's like, why not?
Yeah, so
numbers add up.
It's always important to keep in mind that people promoting these kinds of things lie. They are lying to you, and they were always lying to you. Think of all the benefits we were sold on the diversity is our strength argument. Have any of them come to pass? No. Everywhere is a shithole now, frankly. But there are some people who want to fight back against it. The only person I could find even remotely gesturing in this direction was Rupert Lowe. Robert Jenrick hadn't posted about this. Nigel Farage hadn't.
Oh, don't expect him to.
Keir Starmer might do. You never know. But Rupert Lowe is at least getting people on board with his attempts to try and get mass deportations going, because mass deportations and general remigration are two of the things that really need to happen if we are going to reverse this before we reach a turning point. At which point, who knows what is going to happen. I know, for one, I do not want my children, my grandchildren, to be growing up in a country where there's potentially going to be political parties screaming, "Kill the farmer," as is happening in South Africa. So there are peaceful solutions to it.
I mean, we just don't want to reach the event horizon where it can't be done now.
Yes.
The David Betts warning.
Well, you are over that. We're over that curve. That's the problem with it. And it's not just if we look about the fact that white communities aren't having children. It's because of two other areas. I think first of all is the cost of living in Britain is making it incredibly difficult for young white families who want to have children to be able to decide that they've got to do so now because they've got to stay with their parents for longer. They're living in rented accommodation, which is not conducive to having a family. So therefore pushing them further down the line to age. I mean, I'd love to have had two, but in the end I've had one because I was too old to be able to do it. And that also goes towards women. Yep. You know, it's the families are still having children who are families having children are still having more than 2.1. It's the fact that we've got so many women and families not having children at all. The single families.
There are studies that show that
they're choosing not to.
Diversity inhibits people's desire to have children.
Yeah.
And this is all on top of the changes in culture, which have made the dating market completely toxic. Very, very difficult for any young man in particular to try to navigate to find somebody suitable to have a family with.
It's probably just as bad for young women, to be honest. You know, the sort of young men who are being produced aren't exactly the kind of guys that they're looking for. So
no. I mean, we it's part of our job is to be able to persuade them that, you know, you get off your bike, work, look after yourself, keep healthy, keep fit, keep your mind sensible, ignore what they're telling you in school, get a way of
build yourself up.
Build yourself as a great character and not be the one that slopes off, as I saw coming in on today. It's the kind of guys creeping over the shoulders, hiding outside vape shops, sitting there to smoke themselves to death.
Like they're embarrassed of their own existence.
Yeah, don't be a hoodie. Don't start playing, you know, music that belongs to New York rather than your own. You know, I liked it. I'm a big rapper, but I'm still a British person, English at heart. You know, it's not your culture to listen to it all the time.
I've always said that you need to deglobalize your mind, and part of that is to take part in your ritual folk practices and to listen to the music that's come from your culture and to read the stories that have come from your culture and just to take part in stuff that is kind of native to you. Like on this... It's very silly, it's very goofy, but this weekend a local parish near me is holding a competition where they're going to be doing a rolling the pie down the hill race.
Did you see the cheese wheel rolling the other day?
Yes, exactly. So I'm probably going to go and attend that.
Yeah,
because it's just charming and it's nice.
Adorable.
And it's something, because I was in France last week, and this is something that I've experienced when I've been to Spain as well. One time, actually, I was in Spain on holiday, and there was some local festival going on in the town that I was staying in, where they were all out and they were all celebrating, and they were shooting off. It was very dangerous. They were shooting off, little children shooting off fireworks in the middle of the street, not up, horizontally, shooting it at each other. It was very entertaining and very Spanish. And, you know, Spain is not such a foreign culture to us. They're European. They're quite near.
They are pretty foreign.
Well, they are foreign in comparison to some places.
They're pretty damn foreign.
Yeah, but they're all really nice. They were very friendly. And looking at it, I could only observe it as an alien.
Yeah.
As a stranger, I was looking at it going, this is charming, this is wonderful, everybody's enjoying themselves. I'm going to take a step back so I don't get blown up, but, you know, feel free to fire those fireworks if you want. But I can't appreciate those in the same way that I can go to this parish on the weekend. Or a few weeks ago when I was in Hastings for the Man on the Green festival as well, which felt like something that was much closer to me and my own history. Because it's an English holiday. And so even European cultures, you can only observe their traditions as a foreigner. So you should get involved in that sort of stuff just so you can feel a bit closer.
When you're looking at that, you raise a very important point. You feel like you're a foreigner, but it's quaint and you're loving the culture of somebody else. I don't understand. I can't get into the head of all these liberal elites who turn around and say, I love going off to France and Spain and Italy and enjoying exactly what you have seen, but when they come back here, they don't enjoy our own culture. They're not, our own dancing around the maypole, which I don't see anymore. I
saw a bit of that at the Man on the Green festival.
Okay.
Actually, it's charming. It's very charming.
What about our culture? Why are they so hatred of that culture? And obviously, George Orwell identified it, but they hate the English culture, but they think it's quaint when they go elsewhere.
Well, there's a certain cosmopolitan arrogance that comes with feeling that not being rooted to anywhere gives you a sense of class superiority. Yeah. They think if they can appreciate the alien and the foreign that they're not attached to, that makes them tasteful.
I tell you,
that's a very good point.
I thought the video.
Disagree with that.
I thought the video of the cheese wheel race thing was amazing as well, because you saw the one guy just bouncing. It's like, is that guy all right?
And then he got straight back up as well. It's awesome.
That looked bloody painful.
That's the kind of British spirit that won so many
exactly.
wars.
Yeah, gnomes. Putting gnomes in your garden.
Yeah. If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.